Hello, thank you so much for tuning in to the Moss Center's Paul Taylor Dance Company Dance Talk in support of their performances on Saturday, March 9th and Sunday, March 10th. I'm Annie Hoffman and I'm the Education and Outreach Manager here at the Moss Center. This opportunity is brought to you with support of the Miami-Dade County Department of Cultural Affairs, the Board of County Commissioners, and the Office of the Mayor. I would now like to introduce our moderator, Jordan Levin, who will introduce our distinguished panelists. Jordan?
Hi, everybody. So I'm happy to be here again talking about dance. I'm here with the artistic director of the Paul Taylor Dance Company, Michael Novak, and one of the dancers from the company, Madelyn Ho. And we are, of course, talking about Paul Taylor, which is thrilling. He's one of the pillars of what we used to call modern dance. One of the, not as early as Martha Graham and Doris Humphrey, but in the and Isadora, but the next generation who really had such a major role in making modern dance such an enormous and a powerful part of the dance world. And his work had a humanism, a profound humanity, both in the style and the subjects, and this kind of classical construction that made his dances, for me and for many other people, some of the most beautiful and powerful in the modern dance world. Michael, I'm going to start with you.
Of course.
Paul Taylor passed in 2018. And so the company is faced, like with the companies of Martha Graham, of the work of Merce Cunningham. There's no longer a Merce Cunningham Dance Company. And in many ways, the work of George Balanchine. The Paul Taylor Company has to balance preserving the work, the physical style, the vision of your founder, while also ensuring that you don't turn into a museum, that you're still doing new work. So can you tell us about how you balance all that, how you do that?
The magic of it all.
Yes.
It's been interesting because there's an expression that we say within the dance field about being a repertory company. And a repertory company means that the company performs work by several choreographers, not just one. Historically, from when Paul founded the company in 1954 to 2014, we only performed Paul Taylor's work. So exclusively Paul Taylor, but within the range, and you talked about this a little bit, the range of his repertoire is so vast that alumni who danced during that time always felt like they were in a repertory company, because Paul's music choices, his approach to movement, his designs, how he programmed, it was the goal for him, for your audience, was that you felt like three different choreographers just presented work on a night. And that was a challenge he put upon himself. So that variety is something that's always been embedded into our cultural DNA here. So when Paul brought in, or opened the doors to bring in not just new choreographers to make new work on the company, he also wanted us to perform works from the 20th and 21st century that had significant artistic relevance and impact, but might need a platform in which to really showcase their genius. So harkening back to the works of Louis Fuller, to Isadora Duncan, to Jose Limon, Martha Graham, also Shen Wei, really covering this scope of kind of the pantheon of modern dance. In terms of balancing the past, present, and future, I find that the understanding of who came before you and what they did and why, the storytelling from our alumni is essential to not just the preservation of work, but to make it feel relevant and alive. And Madelyn can certainly speak to this as well, that we are a multi-generational foundation. Every generation has a story. Worked with Paul during a different type of exploration in his artistic maturation. So their knowledge of the cultural moment, intention, insights, the stories, all of that gets combined with the actual steps and the counts and the things that are more, you might say, scripted, so to speak. But when you have that original source there, there's a freshness that is created that makes the works feel very relevant and not like they're a facts of a facts of a facts of a facts. So combining all of that is essential to our success and keeping the repertory alive.
I'd be really interested to hear more about how you work with alumni, former company members, partly because I spent a lot of years when I was the dance critic at the Miami Herald. I spent many, many years covering Miami City Ballet. And one of the things that then leader Edward Villela did was he was constantly bringing in dancers who'd worked directly with Balanchine to coach Jules or Aegon or well, not Aegon, too old, but works that they had been original or early cast members to really bring those pieces to life for the dancers, and also to get those details of style and interpretation and impulse that make it look like a vivid live painting and not, as you say, Michael, a copy of a copy of a copy. So could you relate a couple of instances which have been really powerful of alumni interpreting Taylor works? And Madelyn, maybe we could choose examples where Madelyn was a part, experienced that coaching and could talk.
It just happened.
Okay.
It actually just happened.
With Promethean Fire?
With the word, actually.
But
Yeah.
and Madelyn could talk about what it meant to have a dancer bring that work to life for a new generation.
I'll just tee it up and pass it off to Madelyn. I think I work with our rehearsal directors, Betty DeYoung and Kathy McCann. Betty DeYoung has been with the company since 1962. Kathy McCann joined the company as a dancer in 1979, and they have an incredible, far-reaching view of the evolution of the repertory. And I consult with them about the dances that are coming back. This is a dance from the 1970s. Who are the alumni who are around, interested? What is the company working on right now? Is it technical? Is it artistic? Is it expressive? Is it musicality? And then it's matchmaking that alumni who can come in and kind of just give a lot of riches. And it happens with every piece as much as we can. And sometimes an alumni will come in who can watch 3 or 4 in a row, and they were there for a decade or two to get that insight. But it's something we push to have happen as often as we can. And Madelyn, I'll let you take it away.
Sure. So I just worked with Lisa Viola, who is a alumni of the company who, for me, I mean, she's someone who everyone respects and loves. And I feel the same way. And on top of that, she is someone who I have admired and follow. And she was someone who, when I first started at the Winter Intensive, she was the one who sort of took me under her wings and was like, let's work on your Taylor style. And so, in some ways, having her come in is, she's a living idol for me that has come in to help coach me. Most recently, she came in to help coach the Word, which we had just put together, and she was an originator of the part. And she is someone who is an amazing performer. And, for us, we learn off of videos most of the time, or that's how we initially start before we have people come in and coach. And, you know, just watching her on video is just amazing. And I can, you know, one can learn so much from watching a video. But it's still not the same as having someone come in and be able to tell the stories and the experiences of when Paul was creating on her, you know, and the things that he wanted her to do. For example, there's one step where uh she throws her hands behind her head and then it's like a cabriole backwards. And it looks amazing on the video because she's like soaring through space, and you know, I'm trying to recreate that feeling of both powerfulness and the intensity of sort of sweeping across the room around these groups of people, right? And as I was doing it afterwards, she was like, I just want to let you know, when Paul created this, he wanted my head to be below my feet. And I was like, wait, so your hands touch the floor? She's like, no, 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 your hands don't touch the floor. He wanted her to bring her head down and kick her feet above her body. And she was always like, I tried, it never worked, but he liked the attempt of it. And so she's like, I know this is impossible, but just know in the back of your mind, that was the request. So what does that mean to you? How does that change the step for you? Right. And she was like, she thinks that that was the directive because she was too upright. And so so for me, it's like, it's not just about putting your head down, but really thinking of that sensation, and something about that imagery changed the way it felt, right? You're like, oh, this is one of those things that you strive for and you can never achieve, but it's the striving for that makes it powerful in something, right? And even just hearing her experiences, right? Because like, as I'm putting it together, I start developing my own stories of what it feels like, both internally and the story that I'm trying to convey to the audiences. And then hearing her experiences of what it felt like to do that role. So for example, the costume actually changed from when it first was created to later parts when the piece was performed. And one of the questions I asked her was, did the change of the costume change the way you did the movement? And she said, not really, but the way the audience sees it is very different. And so she felt like the movement was what she was true to, and not necessarily how the costume transformed the role. So it was interesting to hear that, because to me, as an observer, as an audience member, it feels like it is so different between the two because it tells such a different story. And it was fascinating to hear how the essence of the movement is still the essence of the movement itself.
Yeah. You made me think of two moments. One, a moment when Violette Verdi was coaching Miami City Ballet, and she was telling one of their soloists, you're a princess. You're framing your tiara, and then you're weeping, and then you're framing it. And it absolutely transformed the way that dancer did that movement. Can you tell us, I wish I'd asked this at the beginning, just a little bit about what the word is about that piece? I'm not familiar with it.
Sure. So the word was choreographed in 1998, and it's one of Paul's be aware or be wary of conformity pieces. And it's a company of dancers who are in a very androgynous look of school uniforms, ties, suspenders, almost like a prep school or a religious school. There's a program note that goes with the dance that is, for our God is a consuming fire. And not all the time would Paul give the audience a program note, but in this case he does. And the word refers to the word of God. So there's a definite conformity through the lens of religious, a religious institution, except for one individual, played by Madelyn Ho, originally by originated by Lisa Viola, that comes in and torments and disrupts these notions of conformity and almost starts to pull this religious fanaticism into, I would say, like a place of like menace and darkness and heaviness. Madeline, does that sound about right without giving too much away?
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because it's like, I think in some ways there is also room for ambiguity, right? Like it can be viewed both ways because initially I feel like I come in as like the force. And the question is, am I trying to, so initially my own interpretation was that I was the one who was pulling everyone together, right? It was the force that was moving people and in some ways sort of corralling people together to this conformity. Yet I'm the one who stands out, right? But then Lisa pointed out something. She's like, at the end, have you succeeded and everyone is moving away with your force, or are they moving away from you? Because she saw it as she had not succeeded and that they were still moving beyond. In which case that made me pause and go, so then are you trying to break them out of their conformity? Are you then the force that is the opposite? So I think it can be interpreted in many different ways.
And one of the things that's so wonderful about Taylor's work is that it has this humanistic and dramatic
Yes.
and emotional dimension, while very rarely being explicit in any way. Sometimes there are costumes that give you really strong hints, but his work is really such a shining example of dance's capacity to communicate ideas, feelings that you really can't communicate in words, in the way that music can.
We're very careful about, and it's a challenge as a director to like not give too much meaning behind the art that we show. Specifically, one, Paul was a modernist, so there was like a deep philosophical value about not having to contextualize your art, and the audience's reaction to your art was on them, and it's not their job to coddle you or support you like this is your art. Now, when you're dealing with a legacy and sustainment and the culture we're in right now that wants to know more, it's this question of how do you give enough information that creates an entry point without telling people what things mean. So we often try to stick with new audiences, particularly of all ages. How does it make you feel? What did you see and how did it make you feel? And get people to enter their critical thinking through almost an emotional lens, and owning that it can and might be different for every audience member, and that's okay. And that's what extraordinary art can do, and what Paul's works do. They're incredibly human in how they're generated, and how they're expressed. But there's also an ambiguity and an abstraction there that allows different audiences of different ages from different parts of the world to respond differently.
I want to get to, so I'll challenge you in a little bit because I want to talk about the two pieces on the program at the Moss Center, which is Promethean Fire, which and Amy Garner Hall's, do I have that name correct?
Amy Hall Garner.
Amy Hall Garner,
yeah.
Excuse me. Somewhere in the middle. So well, let's jump into that. So with Promethean Fire, so he created it soon after 9/11. And I will share a tiny anecdote. I interviewed him. I was at the Miami Herald then, and I interviewed him over the phone. And it was around the time of Promethean Fire, and I had just gone to New York City uh, in October, so very soon after the event, after the
Mm,
destruction of the World Trade Center. And I saw this moment on the street in the East Village where a couple of girls were walking past a fire station, and there are two firemen standing outside. And one of the girls just walked up to them and gave him a big smack and kiss, and
mm.
said, "Thank you." And they did that kind of shuffly, aw shucks guy thing that some straight guys do. Anyways, I told Paul that story, and it seemed to strike him.
Mm.
It seemed to really catch his attention. So, so Promethean Fire was interpreted by many people at the time as being inspired by, driven by the events of 9/11. So, Michael, can you talk about that
Yeah.
without, again, telling people what to think? And I hope
Yeah.
I haven't blown it by saying that. And Madeline, presuming that you're in it, what is it like to dance such an unbelievably powerful piece? Because there's something really monumental about that work.
I think I would say that Paul was adamant both in the creative process and in kind of the success of Promethean Fire, that it was not enough, it was not about 9/11. He was not responding to 9/11.
Mm,
That he used the word passion a lot when he was creating the work, and a lot of the original cast members talk about it.
mm,
And there's certainly a notion within the work of a community of individuals that the structure that holds them up collapses and then is reborn again, and that it is far more timeless than any one event. And it goes back to this conversation about like the humanity in Paul's work, like the human being's ability to overcome and endure and to support each other. So Paul was thinking of it much bigger than that. I think the work, at least for me, watching it from the front, bringing it back, coming out of the pandemic, had a whole other relevance to it because of the nature of what had just happened during the pandemic and performing the work. So the work can stay the same, but the cultural lens in which it's viewed can actually make the work significant in different ways.
mm,
The two things that make it very unique within all 147 dances that Paul made, one is it uses all 16 dancers of the company. And Paul never did that because he wanted to have understudies. So it was the first time audiences saw all 16 dancers on stage at once. The other thing that he did that was very unique, he had a very close, what we call a relationship with Bach. He did a number of dances to Bach, including Esplanade, which many audiences know. What Paul chose to do with Promethean is he used the Stokowski version of Bach's toccata and fugue. So he didn't stick with the original Baroque orchestration. He went with the big symphonic, powerful version of the toccata and fugue, and it sets it apart from like a more traditional Baroque score, and the weight of the music matches having 16 dancers on stage. But what it means to perform it and how it feels on the inside
mm.
is a fascinating experience. And I'll let Madelyn take that.
I mean, I love the work. It's a piece that I love watching. I love performing it. And, as Michael said, it is a unique piece where all of us are on stage together. And, even from the first moments when the curtain rises, right? You feel the presence and weight of it, right? So as we're standing there in preparation, the beginning notes of the piece start and the curtain's down. And there's a moment where the curtain starts to creep up slowly and then it whisks away right as the music rises. And you're just revealed, all 16 of us on stage in this very weighted, almost meditative state, right? Like all of our presence is there. It's not showcasing, it's almost drawing people in like the presentness of everyone on stage. And from that moment, everything unwinds and unfolds from there, right? And there's so many moments, there's just so many moments of everything sort of moving together in almost chaotic fashion, but somehow it all unravels to the next shape. So one of the things that we have is this weave where it's two interlocking circles. We call them Olympic circles. And it is one of those things that it is something we are always working on. There is always a moment of, is it going to work? Is it not going to work? But it always works somehow. It always manages to unfurl, sometimes more successfully in others. But it is one of those moments where it's like all of us having to work together as a group in a way that feels very much part of the storytelling of the piece, right? It is all these individuals coming together and creating something together, right? And that another moment for me that stands out as really iconic for the piece is at the end of the first section when this huge pile is formed. And as the pile is collapsing, there's a person that picks up another person out of the pile. And to me, that is very much that feeling of hope and support and lift of bringing someone out of this, right? And, I think you can think about in the lens of 9/11, but as Michael said, you can think of it as any human experience of any turmoil, of any trauma, of any disaster, of, it doesn't even have to be on such a large scale, right? Even just like personal individual uplift of another human being, right? It's that powerful moment where the person stands, helps the other person up, and everyone else is there to witness this moment, right? This very, very personal, very individual, very tender moment before everything spreads out and they're left as just the two individuals. And it's almost like you get to zoom in and see more into this very touching moment. And I just think with Promethean, there's so many moments of hope, right? There is the chaos, there is those moments that can be interpreted as destruction, but from it, there is always hope. There is always that uplift. And even in that last pose, everyone comes back together, and it almost is the way the lifts rise up and the structure at the front, the formation sort of unfurls. There's something about growth and renewal to me in that moment that really conveys that ultimate message.
Yeah. That's beautifully said, and it makes me jealous that you get to be
It's a beautiful work.
inside that. Are you one of those? I remember that moment from the dance. Are you one of those two people? It's a man and a woman, I think. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I have had the opportunity to do it, but the people who are performing it are Iran Buggy and Devin Louie.
Yeah, and I was able to perform that part before Devin Louie. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
So this brings us, I want to zoom in on something which to me is incredibly important about Taylor's work, which is his style.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think of it as being a technique in the way that I think of Graham technique or Cunningham technique. But I do think of Taylor's work as having some really essential elements. There's a sense of weight. It doesn't pound into the ground. It's not as into the ground as Graham. There's this, to me, a sense of like a sculptural sense of shape that's really three-dimensional, unlike most classical ballet where all that shape is frontal. With Taylor work, there's this dimensional sculptural aspect to the shape where you really feel the whole dancer back front all around. And a sense of, especially in the pedestrian works or certain works like Esplanade, an ability to make the dance look very natural, right? Very human. These are somehow just like people, but
Hmm.
they can, you know, kind of they can do these amazing things, but they never look as formally presented as you see
Hmm.
in a lot of other dance. So and a lot of ballet companies, I'm not sure if they're doing it as much, but for quite a while, a lot of ballet companies were doing tailor pieces, and including Miami City Ballet. And I think they often missed that sense of weight, that sense of three dimensionality. They could do the shapes very well, they could do the piece, but I was always missing these qualities. So, um, Michael, could you tell us about how you use alumni, how you preserve that
Mm.
his style, and again, Madeline, I'd love to hear any experiences you've had with learning it and getting that into your body.
I think there are three important things for, I think, audiences, but also, students at our school to realize. Paul was a painter,
Mhm.
then he was a swimmer,
Mhm.
then he was a dancer, then he was a choreographer. And I think painting explains how he creates works for the stage because the proscenium is a frame. And I think Paul's sense of where to pull the eye is extraordinarily honed and crafted in his work. It's also, interestingly, I think one of the reasons why we don't use mirrors in our rehearsal studios. And
Mhm.
audiences tuning in, most dance studios, nearly all dance studios, have mirrors, and you rehearse facing the mirror to learn how you look. Now, Paul did not use mirrors, so the studio is a blank canvas, and it allowed Paul to create. But what it also does is the dancers have to hone a sense of how they experience each other and the work
Mm.
through feeling, not seeing themselves in the mirror. And that's a big, it cannot be underestimated, the significance that brings to a rehearsal space.
Mm.
Coupled with that is Paul was a competitive swimmer. I like to say, like, if you think of Michael Phelps, I mean, just the wingspan was huge, wide back, incredibly athletic. No, at that time in dance, no one that big or that tall moved like that. No one had ever seen that. And it would kind of
But that
defied
incredible
the
wingspan.
wingspan and the speed and the fluidity. So it was incredibly unique in the history of dance to see someone that big move like that without classical training, classical ballet training. And Paul brought that athleticism, we're a thigh, glute, back company. I mean, it's deep work, and that comes from his own physique in the same way that Graham and Cunningham and Lamone created a style through their own physique. But the fluidity, the use of the back, is something very unique among all of the modern kind of icons. And even when we performed a Graham piece several years ago, it was my first time performing Graham, and I was amazed at how much containment there is in trying to find spiral and release through it. But Paul's always falling off of his leg. Paul's always swirling out of something. It's rarely contained in a shape, you just pass through a shape.
And yet you see the shape so clearly along the way.
And when you have no mirrors, you have hours in the pool and incredible fluidity through shape, but then the element of intention and gesture is also huge. Paul knew ASL, his partner was deaf and mute, they communicated through sign language, so gesture, touch, the use of hands, making sure that people really see something and read it as a sign is also in his work. And it's kind of hidden, you might sense it if you see enough of it, but that giving that weight to gesture, letting it sink in on who's giving and who's receiving, makes the Taylor style a Taylor style. So it's not a technique. It's just these different elements coming together. Madelyn, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Jordan, I love that you're able to put into words, because sometimes for me, what makes Taylor different is hard to put into words. And sometimes for me, it's not singing it that allows me to see it, if that makes sense. For me, one of the things that I found that really helped transform my understanding of Taylor and what makes something Taylor and the Taylorness of something is understanding all the in-betweens, right? Because it's, as you pointed out, like the shapes are important, but what makes the shapes show and meaningful is everything in between those shapes, right? Like it's that interstitial workings, the connections between those points that makes it powerful, right? Because there's infinite ways to create shape or motion. And so what is it the stop, or is it I can move my hand the same way, but that can be like a reach or more of a thoughtfulness versus a sharp stop. And so what are those elements? How is is my palm more fingertips reaching, or is it more palm reaching? Like all these little elements that transforms how it's seen. And as humans, right, the audiences read body language all the time and often on a very subconscious level. So it's like, how do you tap into all those elements to be able to convey those messages, right? And to do it without a mirror. And I think what helps actually is that communication with the person that you're dancing with, right? It's not just pantomiming to them, like you are saying something to them, or you're really looking at them in a way that reads from the audience, right? Something that seems so right in front of you that might not reach an audience, like it can be seen, right? I had this moment where I was watching a couple do this duet, and it was a very intimate moment of someone reaching around and hugging someone. And, in the studio, I was like, oh, something about it doesn't seem quite right, but maybe from the stage it won't read. And in a tech rehearsal watching it, I was like, I'm sitting in like the middle of the orchestra, but it reads, right? Like I can see it. So I was like, I wonder if rather than thinking of encircling, rather than having your palm reach out, what if you think of your fingertips, or like not your fingertips leading, but of the palm reaching? I know your fingertips are in front of your palms, and so they'll naturally go first, but like, what if you think of initiating through the palms? And I was like, I know it sounds crazy. And he did it, and I sat out in the audience and watched it, and I was like, it makes a difference. I can see that, right? Like something about it changes just the way the fingers move when you think of the palms reaching. And these are things that I love delving into, because I feel like this is like the substance of dance, right? Like, yes, there's all the technique part of it and like hitting those shapes, but why? What is it for? What does it convey? And those it's those transitions, that like the in-betweens that make it read. And I think Paul really wanted to emphasize that, right? Like as Michael said, he wanted those gestures to mean something, and they aren't just throwaway elements, right? It's not about just the big jumps and the big grand moments. It's about those in-betweens, and it requires both to have both reach the extreme to create that dynamicism.
Dynamism, I think.
Dynamism, there we go.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure we have time to talk about Somewhere in the Middle and the contemporary, the new works. But Madeline, you have such a mind-boggling bio that I want to ask you to talk about that briefly, if you don't mind. But I'm just going to tell people that Madeline managed to graduate from Harvard and Harvard Medical School. Is that correct? Well, training as a dancer, getting into and then dancing with the Taylor Company. So I want to leave time to talk about Somewhere in the Middle, but how the heck did you do that? And what I'm wondering if there's any connection about the interest in life and wanting to be a doctor and the humanism of Taylor's work. Um, anyways,
Good
how did
question. So yeah, for me, I got into Taylor too right after college. And for me, medicine and science was something that I had always loved growing up. And so for me, it was always a balance between academics and dance. It was something I loved, and I was always striving to find some way to be able to do both, right? Or finding ways to be able to meld the two in a way. And my interest in medicine actually came from dance, of learning that there's this very niche field called dance medicine, where you take care of dancers, whether it's physical, mental, all aspects of the dancer. And to me, that felt like such a wonderful way to be able to bring together both of my passions. And it felt like something that I could really contribute in a very unique way to help other people. So that was where the medicine connected with dance. And, with Taylor 2, after Taylor 2, I felt like I was retiring from dance to start medicine, just because it's a very long road and got to get started. And while I was in medical school, there was an audition for the main company. And it was one of those things where I was like, this does not make any sense, but it's something that I just have to do. Came back for the audition. Mr. Taylor was like, would you like a spot in the company? And he said to me, medicine can wait. And I said, you're absolutely right. And then in our in-between times when we were off from the company, I was able to graduate from medical school. And it's one of those things where medicine is still very important to me, but at the moment I'm really loving where I am now and dancing while I still can and treasuring those moments, right? It can't dance forever, unfortunately, as much as we all wish we could. So for me, the focus and priority right now is dance. But I do imagine myself sometime in the future, once I'm no longer dancing, of being able to find some way to bring together dance and medicine in a way, whether it's clinical practice or through some other realm, to be able to help and support and advocate for dancers. Because often at times I feel like dancers aren't often looked after and cared after in a way that they deserve.
Okay, it's an amazing story you have. So, Michael, please tell us about Somewhere in the Middle. And actually, first, please tell us about Amy Hall Garner.
Yes.
Why did you commission her? And if you could put her commission in the context of the other contemporary works, new artists that you choose for the company.
Sure. So as I mentioned a bit earlier, Paul started opening up contemporary commissions back in 2014. And that he started that, he did a number of commissions, and I had taken that over as artistic director. And I first saw Amy's work at Juilliard, actually. She's a Juilliard alumna. She has a classical ballet background and a lot of work in jazz and commercial theater. So she was a Rockette for a number of years. She choreographed Beyonce's, one of Beyonce's tours. She's done some work I think either on or off Broadway. And so she comes with the commercial and the concert dance experience, which is a very interesting palette for me. But I saw her work at Juilliard, and there was a sense of musicality. There was a sense of how to move people through space that was extraordinarily good. And there was also, we say humanity, but there was a definite, like, she was able to get the dancers to be themselves and unified in how they were producing her movement, which is very hard to do sometimes. And I felt like I was seeing the dancers for who they were, but they still had a sense of unison. And so I followed her for a little bit, and then I offered her a commission, and I offered it to her like in January 2020, right before things happened. And then ironically, when we went into the pandemic, I was talking with Lourdes Lopez at Miami City Ballet. We were trying to figure out, could we do something remotely? And we both had an affinity towards Amy Hall Garner. So during the pandemic, Amy created a solo on a dancer at Miami City Ballet and a dancer at Taylor, and then we created a film that brought these two pieces together. So then I worked with Amy during the pandemic, and her piece that she made for the company, Somewhere in the Middle, premiered last year, or sorry, 2022 at Lincoln Center. And how Amy talks about dance making is she's very focused on the heartbeat and the rhythm of a work, and that she wants audiences to leave feeling joyful, feeling inspired, and feeling driven to go forward. And for her work on our company, she chose 8 dancers, and she wanted to combine 2 American art forms, jazz and modern dance, and bring those 2 together. And the Somewhere in the Middle is a reference of these 2 American art forms coming together. So it's big band music, Sarah Vaughan, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, and what that flavor that brings to our history within America, but then the modern dance element of that, and what can jazz pull out of modern, and what can modern pull out of jazz. So that's the nature of Somewhere in the Middle.
Makes me think of Tango Piazzolla. Am I right? Have I got the name right?
Piazzolla Caldera. But yes, it's a similar notion of what can modern dance highlight or reveal about music that might have a certain connotation or a certain feeling for audiences, and how do we create that dialogue between 2 art forms. And Madelyn's, she was there for the creative process, so Madelyn might be able to speak to how Amy balanced that, because her musicality is insane. It's so good.
I want to hear about that, but one question about the music. So is it swing? Is there any commonality between the music other than it's all big band jazz from, I'm assuming, like mid 20th century, early mid 20th century?
There's no swing. It's more songbook, predominantly. I think it's the flow, Madelyn. I think she's picked songs that, again, I go back to heartbeat. She has a way of picking music that, it keeps a groove going, and she gives you a moment of this beautiful duet in the middle that kind of calms things down for a second, and then she revs you back up. It's almost like she has Paul's ear for different music that might not normally go together, but she creates this arc over the course of 25 minutes. That's quite fabulous.
So Madelyn, what was it like to work with her? What were some of the things that she told all of you about the piece? What's it like? What's the piece like as a dancer?
Yeah, I mean, she, as Amy was creating, she didn't talk specifically about what the entire piece was about, but she was very clear in terms of what she wanted, and she did know the music amazingly. And so there were there were moments where she was like, I can, because she would create a bunch of movement, and then she would put the music on top of it, and then she'd be like, okay. She wanted to see how you would move naturally, given the movement that she had given you, and where it would naturally fall in the music, or how you interpreted it. So it would be in the music. And then there would be moments where she's like, I like that. But actually, I want this to fall on this particular part of the music. And then she would sing it, and she's like, do you hear that part? And you're like, can you play it again? I know you're looking for something specific, but I don't hear it yet. And so it's being able to hear the music in a way that she hears it too, which was part of the learning experience. Which I love, right? Like, as a person who used to be a counter, who doesn't count as much and who really listens to the music, I really appreciated that. And it was amazing to see how quickly she created movement too, because talking to her, I was curious what her process was like. And she says she has a general idea of the feel of the piece, but doesn't have specific movement necessarily laid out. And part of the reason for that was, she says that she wanted to be able to really see the dancer in front of her. So when Michael pointed out like that, he got to see how the trueness of the dancer themselves. That was something that Amy really valued and worked to create, right? That was part of her process. And so she would start with something off, and then have you do it, because she didn't want you just to recreate what she did, right? She wanted to see how it looked like on my body, or on different dancers' bodies. And from there, that inspired her to create like the next several elements. And so it was creating a little bit, going back, it's like a little forward back process, but always attached to the music, that it was never removed or separate from the music. The music really drove where she saw things going. And I think you can see that in the piece when you're watching it.
Can't wait to see it. And it sounds like, I don't want to ask what the piece is like, but it sounds like a beautiful juxtaposition, the power and weight of Promethean Fire with what I'm imagining, given what you say about the score, the songbook,
It's great.
the emotion and flow, and the musical quality, the emotional quality of those songs informing the choreography in your performances.
I mean, I try to
too.
It's a great, it's always about foils, like commissioning work and programming work that offers these different facets of an aesthetic experience. And when I commission choreographers, and even with resident choreographer Lauren Lovett right now, who's making her 5th and 6th work on the company right now, is we talk about what hasn't been done. We talk about what is, if I'm programming a bunch of Taylor pieces, I might need a songbook, or I might need something that's more classical, like romantic or Baroque classical. I might need something that's more 21st century contemporary. And so it's finding choreographers who can kind of live in that world and bring a unique facet to everything that we do. But I don't like being married to one aesthetic either, because Paul wasn't. He had values and principles that kind of guided his artistic process, but we can give you something very avant-garde and exceedingly classical that's been done by ballet companies around the world. And that range is something that our commissioned choreographers, I think, should also be able to reflect that in what they do. So.
Okay, so we're just about out of time. And you two have been wonderful and given me, and I hope everybody who tunes in, so much insight into the company and into Taylor and his work. So I'm going to remind the audience, I know Annie will repeat this, but the show is evening show Saturday, March 9th, and a matinee on Sunday, March 10th. And everybody should come see this extraordinary company.
Yes, after hearing that conversation, am even more excited than I already was. So I just can't wait. Thank you so much for this conversation. I also want to thank our moderator, Jordan Levin, our incredible panelists for this wonderful dance talk. And as Jordan mentioned, tickets for the Paul Taylor Dance Company performances at the Moss Center are Saturday, March 9th and Sunday, March 10th. Tickets are available now. You can visit mosscenter.org to get your tickets. And we do look so forward to seeing you there. Thank you again, everyone.